Welcome, fellow plebs. My name is Sean, and this is
Tribunus Plebis.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Tribunus Plebis podcast. So let's just call this the New Year's episode, okay? This really should have been the last episode, but, we had a riot at the Capitol, and I thought that was worth devoting a little time to, and it didn't feel like the best time for this sort of intro. First, I want to thank all of you for listening. The podcast continues to grow, and it's all because of you good folks. I am deeply appreciative of each and every download and listen and share, and the reviews and feedback have been absolutely amazing. Thank you all for everything. Now, 2020 was one hell of a year, right? It was pretty bad, right? It's become a meme at this point, how bad it was. But let's not dwell on that. We all lived through it. We all know how bad it felt. And honestly, 2021 is not off to a very auspicious start either. But I'm going to do my best here to not let that get me down. So let's take a look ahead for what awaits us here at Tribunus Plebis. Right now, my focus is on both always trying to improve the show, whether that be sound quality or content or anything else really, and specifically to get this podcast out as a weekly show. The final goal will be to release it every Monday or Tuesday, and that will give us the weekend to record, edit, and publish. But I'm not quite there yet, so this isn't yet a promise, but it will come. Also, I plan to begin doing discussions with people and interviews as well, which was always a goal for me. Along with interviews, I also want to begin creating actual video content for the YouTube channel. So don't be afraid to subscribe using the link in the description so that you will be on the ground floor of actually seeing my wonderfully handsome face. So that's what we have in store for you good folks in this glorious new year. Also, I'm going to continue to be mean to politicians and assholes in general. Please join me for another year of Tribunus Plebis. Also, hey, Joe Biden is now the president. I guess I'm just down to he's better than Trump, right? That's about as good as I can go right now. And that right there is about all I care to say on the subject right now. Hope he doesn't suck as bad as I think he will, but I'll hit more about Biden next episode. All right, so today I'm going to talk about several things, but first I want to briefly revisit that riot at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Last episode, I talked about my initial feelings about the situation, which was still unfolding and shaking out even as I hit record. In fact, at the end of that episode, I mentioned how my views might change as new information came in. Well, new information came in, and I am going to, modify maybe, or maybe just add to my first thoughts, I guess. I was probably, let me rephrase that. It definitely appears that I was overly dismissive of the, I don't know if severity is the right word here. Maybe I was just too dismissive of the bad actors. I didn't understand how planned it was, maybe, or how they planned violence. Maybe I just whistled past the graveyard one too many times, even as it was clearly on fire on this last go-around. Partly because I recorded it so soon after the riot, I did not have access to some information. I hadn't seen some of the photos or heard some of the stories. Well, today, that's different. I've seen and heard some stuff, a lot of stuff actually. In the previous episode, I talked about how I saw this largely as a mob mentality thing. Some people, likely many with genuine ill intent, rushed the Capitol, it got out of control, and then they broke into the Capitol building and sort of just milled around, very much the dog catching the car and having no idea what to do with it. Still, I think this was probably largely accurate, But those initial people who attacked the Capitol, they definitely were not just overcome with patriotism. And even setting aside the Q shit and the cult shit, a bunch of these people were clearly bent on violence. There were definitely people who were there specifically to cause real harm to lawmakers and others. We had dorks running around dressed like Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe with a fistful of zip tie handcuffs. We had groups of men openly looking for Pelosi, AOC, Omar, and Presley, amongst others, with zip ties, openly talking about getting them. What would they have done if they'd found them? I don't know, but I've seen some shit from posts saying that they intended to harm or even kill them. What seems like it can't be passed off as hyperbole is the zip ties we all saw and the weapons some of them carried. And for sure, those women in Congress, they absolutely felt threatened and terrified and even thought that they might die and even would die if they were found. And let's not pass over the fact that every name I've heard so far that was uttered as someone who these chuds were looking for was the name of a female legislator. Because yeah, of course these pricks are that weak and that worthless and that broken. So there was indeed a lot more danger here than I thought as it happened. There were definitely prepared and dangerous people leading the charge into that building. So I just wanted to acknowledge that before we moved on. And I think it's important to say this because these sorts are exactly the types of people we need to be fighting against. Those who would invade a building in the capital of our country in an effort to support a dictatorial, racist, xenophobic, nationalist, fascistic president and regime in defiance of an election that went against him. To me, this seems pretty clear. And this brings me to something else that came up in a discussion on the Tribunus Plebis Facebook page, but I've heard and read it in various other places as well. This is something which I've been thinking about as a broader concept for a while and was definitely planning on talking about. But like so many other episodes of this podcast, current events have forced my hand a little early. So I'm going to do my best here with my notes and Google document here to kind of wade my way through this while also being coherent. So please forgive me if this isn't quite ready for prime time. Basically, there is a question that goes into something like this. It asks how a person such as myself can be supportive of the BLM protests from early last year and so dead set against what happened in the Capitol. And I'm going to answer that question and then also tie it into a larger question about politicians and talking heads and how they diagnose societal problems and use them to lead us astray. The initial question is basically framed as this. It's like, hey, there were BLM and Capitol protests, and in both instances, property was damaged, people were hurt, and even killed. There were even people breaking into government buildings. How can you be okay with one and not the other given these similarities? Well, here's the thing. All of that's true as far as it goes. And I think that this is an important question to deal with when someone asks it in good faith. So I'm going to do my best here to explain how I think about this. It really comes down to what the protest, and I'm not even willing to call that shit at the Capitol a protest, but that's neither here nor there, for this argument right now. Anyway, it comes down to what the protest was about to begin with. It comes down to what the protesters were actually fighting for. On one side, we have protests about police brutality, particularly against people with brown skin. Basically, we have a call for the state to stop being racist and violent and murderous. On the other side, we have an attempt to overturn a federal election and make sure that the aforementioned racist, fascistic, nationalistic, authoritarian stays in power. I mean, that's a big fucking difference right there. I mean, it's just not even comparable. And that's not even to really bring into who these goobers were trying to entrench in power or why. The specifics are almost irrelevant in some ways, I think. And let me just be clear with something else. I do not give a fuck about property damage. I don't even give a damn about people breaking into a government building and occupying it. Not even a small amount of fucks will be given if people break some glass in a government building, at least in a vacuum. In fact, I'll even go so far as to encourage it to a certain degree. If the politicians stop listening, and I mean listening about something worthwhile here, not some made-up shit about theft of an election or a crazy conspiracy. And I am using that word, conspiracy, in its most pejorative sense here. Go ahead and break a window. Be heard. So I'm not even going to address that part from here on out, just like I didn't really mention it last episode. I just don't care about broken glass or turning Target stores into bonfires. I will, however, stop at calling for anyone to be murdered. I'm pretty comfortable with holding that particular line. And since I just know that there are some people out there like, but what about the 90-year-old woman who owned that yarn store that got destroyed? And yeah, I get it. I wish it hadn't happened. I really do. They did not deserve that. It makes me feel bad, and it even makes me question what I'm saying here. Seriously, it causes real conflict in my brain. But again, the cops should not have murdered that black man in the street. And don't act like you know which black man who was murdered in the street I'm even talking about either. So many people of color have been killed or murdered in questionable, fabricated, or obviously illegal and compromised situations that to pick just one is to basically entirely miss the point. And it's been happening so long and with so little change that it almost boggles the mind. I said almost. The cops didn't fix their shit last week, or last year, or 40 years ago, or 100 years ago, despite entire communities begging and pleading and fighting through the so-called proper channels. So here we are. A riot is the language of the unheard, as Martin Luther King Jr. famously said. So yeah, it matters why these things happen. If there's a protest in favor of fascistic results, I will denounce it, even if it's done in the most polite and courteous manner possible. However, if a protest is in support of a good and righteous cause, I'm going to be for it, even if some shit gets broken along the way. You burn a Target store down to get cops to stop killing people? Hey, God bless. I hope you brought enough accelerant. Just don't kill anybody. In fact, avoid harming anyone at all unless it's self-defense. But if you burn a Target store to keep a racist piece of shit in control of my country, not good at all. I see absolutely nothing inconsistent with this. Hell, if you mildly inconvenience me at an intersection waving a Trump flag around, or even a Biden flag, you're ruining my afternoon. But you protest police violence and hold me up in traffic for 15 minutes, you're getting a solidarity fist and a little hand-to-hand of weed as I drive by, okay? We'd be cool. And this all points to that other thing I've been thinking about for a while, and that's who we listen to and why. Or maybe that's not quite the right way to say it. Maybe it's more how these talking heads and these media types and influencers and even alternative media and even politicians use universal truths to smuggle in their agendas and to get us to support what turns out to be evil or at least immoral intent. This seems incredibly important to talk about. What I mean by this is that this is our almost complete and total inability to disaggregate the diagnosis of problems and the prescriptions of how to fix them from the people who espouse them and their personal ideologies. This is how we end up with a Trump, or even a Biden, to be very frank with you. But here's the thing. We, as people, keep feeling pain. Economic, social, and even emotional pain. We understand that things are screwed up. We understand why things are screwed up. We understand intuitively what the problems are, even if we lack the language to fully express it. The problem here is that shitty liberal politicians like Biden and awful conservative demagogues like Trump, they don't feel the same pains and suffer from the same problems as us. But they know that we do, and they take advantage of it. Trump very accurately diagnosed a lot of the problems that working class voters felt in 2015. And I'm going to leave out the racists and the other obviously bad people here. Let's just focus on the decent people who truly felt an economic impact and maybe clung to Trump in desperation to be heard and helped. But we also had at the same time Bernie Sanders, who diagnosed those exact same problems. We got populism from both sides of the political divide. Trump's prescription was to demonize Mexicans, Muslims, and minorities in general. His promise was to get rid of those brown people, to punish those shithole countries in Africa, to ban the travel of brown Muslim people from predominantly Muslim countries into the U.S. His great message was to shift all blame to the other, that great, unknowable, foreign other. Later on, these same sorts of accusations extended primarily to the Democratic Party and Democratic voters as well, and then to literally everybody but those who most avidly and mindlessly supported him. Cough, fascistic playbook, cough. His message was America used to be great. America used to be exceptional. You know, back in those wondrous golden years when people who looked like me had our own drinking fountains. But then those poor brown people came here and they stole it from you. Those bedraggled masses stole your wealth. They stole your status. And now they're stealing your culture. White Christians draped in flags are remarkable. All others are less than. It's not our fault. It's those dirty heathens from across the borders. The threat is foreign, and it looks different than us. And then Trump largely followed the right-wing populist playbook in doing so. Use overwrought patriotism and myopic nostalgia as a platform, and then anchor bigotry, jingoism, and nationalistic worship to that platform, using chains that are built on blaming those who aren't like us and those who are the most vulnerable themselves while also being powerless to harm us. That is right-wing populism. Populism on the left looks more like Bernie Sanders. Bernie's diagnosis was much the same as Trump's, though they didn't align perfectly. The middle, working and poor classes were being bled dry and hollowed out. Bernie's prescription was to tax billionaires, the mega wealthy, and corporations, raise wages across the board, actually give health care to all, support unions, and provide basic needs for the poor. His greater message was that we needed to embrace each other and stand up to the literally inhuman, regardless of what the Supreme Court says, corporatocracy. Bernie's message was one of broad unity across class, across racial, gender, religious, and every other identity markers we might find. So you see that they had basically the same diagnosis, but radically different solutions. One wanted to empower the people, that was Bernie. The other wanted to divide us by race and religion, isolate the country, and further the wants of the corporate kleptocracy. That would be Trump. In 2015, and running up to the election, I remember polls saying that around 70% of American voters wanted quote-unquote change. And that was very likely true. In fact, I have no real reason to doubt that it was true. And into this mess stepped the populists, one from the far right of that traditional political scale, and one from like the center left. And they came to the same conclusion, or at least to the same talking points. Workers were hurting. Families were hurting. So at the core of this left and right styles of populism, there is this core of agreement. Where the two groups diverge is in solutions. And they don't diverge just a little bit either. It's not choosing between a nail or a screw. It's choosing between border concentration camps and our humanity. There's another spot where this sort of thinking kind of went off the rails during Trump's reign. As his first and only term kicked off, many people said they were appalled that I wanted Trump to fail. They said it was un-American. How could I want our president, to fail? Well, I did want him to fail, because the things he wanted are antithetical to things that I want. If a president, and I'll leave aside Trump here, so just a generic president, if they wanted to become president for life, I don't want them to succeed. If they want to harm the American people, I don't want them to succeed. Now, Trump, if he wants to spend money on a wall, I don't want him to succeed. If he wants to give tax cuts to the corporations and wealthy, deepen the swamp, monetize his office, be generally corrupt, make racist policy, and directly harm the poor, yeah, I don't want him to succeed. Not at all. Now, when he said he wanted to talk to North Korea, did I want successful talks? Yes. Did I want him to succeed with COVID? Yeah, I did. I think I even mentioned in an earlier podcast that I hoped he got it under control, even if that would improve his chances at re-election. I did not want my fellow Americans to die. I wanted him to be successful with COVID. But largely, no. I wanted his stupid ass to fail, because he was largely trying to do awful and sometimes just straight up evil shit. I do not want that sort of shit to succeed. Hell, Biden is now the president, and goddamn I am not rooting for him, because I don't believe that he will be pushing to do good shit, at least broadly. But hey, stay tuned for that. Now, forgive me this sidetrack here, but this reminds me of an episode of the now defunct Mixed Mental Arts podcast that was hosted by Brian Callen and Hunter Motz. There was an episode where they had a guest, and I'm sorry, I just don't remember who, but they were talking about Libya after Gaddafi had been deposed and killed. And before I press on here, please pardon my probably shitty understanding of Libya post-Gaddafi here, but I think that the basic point and idea will hold. Callen was talking about how he didn't understand how the people of Libya could have chosen authoritarianism, and I think at the time this was recorded, there were several regional or tribal warlords, for lack of a better term, who were taking control. But they quote-unquote chose this in the wake of Gaddafi's death over democracy. He just couldn't understand that supposed choice. Then both Motz and the guest were like, no, the Libyan people didn't choose between democracy and dictatorship. In fact, they never really had that choice. They had a choice between chaos and order. And people always tend towards wanting order and wanting it fast. So that was what they chose. Chaos, after all, is extremely dangerous. And by choosing a strongman who can bring order to that chaos, you bring yourself some measure of safety. Not perfect safety, but at least safety with rules which you can understand. And that little tidbit is something that has always stuck with me. Now, obviously, the situation in a North African country after an all-powerful dictator falls isn't really analogous for the United States, right? Shit. But I find it interesting nonetheless. Anyway, let's get back to the larger point here. When things aren't going well, we often want someone to blame. And with that blame, we want change. In fact, we actually accept the act of blaming as change in many instances. How absurd is it that our big change was just reigniting the latent, smoldering racial and national animosity in this country? It's pretty messed up, right? We sometimes want change so much that we are willing to subjugate ourselves to an authoritarian who is willing to harshly apply a violent law and order campaign against minorities and foreigners, or maybe against other tribes, or perhaps even other political parties, or even the government itself, all in a bid for the person in power who is authoritarian and a populist to stay in power. Holy shit, at this point, I can't tell if I'm still talking about Libya after Gaddafi or the United States over the past month. Which is to say, I suppose, that we can't, as people, want change so badly that we blindly choose change with no need or want to actually figure out what those who promise this change are going to actually do. Change could be anything: good, bad, evil, angelic, or even just a big parallel move. Does change mean a higher minimum wage, or does change mean forced labor camps for a minority group? Just to first go to an extreme here, let's say you have a democratic socialist like Bernie Sanders and a fascist, like an actual fascist. And I'm not even talking about Trump here, wink wink, but like a legit ideological fascist. They are both likely to give us similar messages on the surface. They'll tell us that the bankers and corporations are working against us and exploiting us. They'll tell us that the democratic government is corrupt. They'll tell us that it's not our fault. It's someone else's fault. So who do we follow? Well, not the fucking fascist guys. Jesus Christ. Not the fascist. That was not even a hard one, and you blew the test already. See, if a racist, nationalist, dictatorial type makes it to power, all of their supposed solutions are in aims of those goals: racism, nationalism, power, and authoritarianism. And when those solutions are put into effect, we get policies that are racist, rabidly nationalist, and people willing to kill and die to keep that person in power. One guy says we should raise the minimum wage. And then we opt for the guy who wants to militarize our border and utilize border concentration camps to break up families. One guy wants universal health care, free at the point of service. We pick the other guy who offers us a religious ban on Muslim travelers from Muslim countries. One guy suggests unity across all people. We opt to let the guy who literally does nothing but divide. We chose easy bigotry over hard work. Or maybe it's more accurate to say that we chose a leader who let us know that it was okay to be bigots, but who hid it under rhetoric that was everything but subtle. We went into it wide-eyed and cognizant of what we were doing, but we did it anyways. We succumbed to this right-wing populism. We fell victim to those who would destroy that which we supposedly hold most dear. Our last president was a moral, ethical, and political monster who inspired hatred, violence, and even that terroristic, half-assed pseudo-insurrection at the Capitol building. And we, the citizens, we make excuses for the behavior of our government. Or more precisely, we make excuses for whoever we elected and the party from which they came. We so blindly follow our favorite political leaders that we have completely lost track of right and wrong, moral and immoral, humane and inhumane. Instead of seeing and speaking the truth we all know, we rationalize all the horrors that our government releases upon the world because we are afraid of being wrong. We follow and abide because to do otherwise would be to admit that we chose who to listen to incorrectly. And the weaponization of patriotism that accelerated under Trump carries with it another devious trap. If we don't rationalize and apologize for the obviously immoral actions of our government or its leaders, we get labeled as non-patriots, even traitors. Our identities have become so entwined with flags and political parties and political leaders that we are no longer even looking where we are walking. We watch neither our feet nor the location to which we are being led. We are simply pulled along blindly on the coattails of political groupthink, our media bubbles, and presidential cults of personality. I feel like I got a little rambly back there and maybe lost my thread somewhere. So let me just try to get back into it as I read you something here. It's not super long, but I find it interesting, especially with what's been going on in this country for the past year. Quote, "It always starts out as some sort of thinly or perhaps not so thinly veiled racism, doesn't it? A real live example of what we might call the foot in the door technique. They are rapists and murderers. They are stealing your jobs. They are killing our daughters. They are stealing your money, running the banks, destroying your culture, and on and on. Then they are demonized. They become the other. This sort of narrative is insidious. It starts on the fringes and seeps its way firmly into a certain subset of people. Soon it is accepted by many, and the next steps begin. The other is not us. It's us versus them. It's right in the language our leaders use. Words like invasion, disgusting, dirty, filthy, mobs. Words evocative of insects, like infest, and disease, like infected. Anything to dehumanize and debase. Anything to engender enmity. This lie is quickly absorbed into that small zeitgeist as well. Our leaders repeat over and over how they are coming. The invasion is on the way. They will take your job, they will rape your children, they will overrun your city, they will destroy your culture. They will be called parasites and leeches. This new lie is quickly ingested and internalized. They become the enemy. This small, troubled group begins to grow as they network and incept those who are ideologically close to them. Then the rhetoric ratchets up a few notches. Walls become accepted. Then armed towers on the wall become accepted. A fully militarized border is soon seen as a normal idea. Next come the brown shirts, officially sanctioned goon squads sent out to sow terror in our country. Valorized as patriots, they are sent out to find, arrest, and detain them. Those people are trying to infest, rob, rape, and murder us, after all. Not only do we quickly find events like this normal, but we turn them into heroes. End quote. That was all written by a super brilliant, super genius man, me, and posted on my blog 2 years ago. And I think it explains a lot of what we've seen lately. It's from a piece I wrote about the concentration camps on our borders and how such things existing was a direct degradation of our souls. That degradation just continued in different forms in the 2 years since. And I think that the most important thing that we need to understand is that all of this is not a mistake. Othering is not a side effect. It is the intent. The language that came from the White House and its allies over the last 4 years was purposeful and intentional. Foreigners were not being othered accidentally. They were being targeted. The Trump administration understood that words mattered, and they were using them to manipulate us in a very precise manner. The attacks on media were intentional. The accusations of being anti-American were intentional. The creation of us versus them dynamics was intentional. Those who currently hold power understand the issues in this country. They know who is afraid of which genuine issues, and they know where they live. They understand how to leverage these real, present fears through language and turn it into a distrust and hate, and they are going to do it. And I'm recording this the same day as Biden's inauguration, so this goes for him too. After all, this is America. And that, my friends, is the end of our episode. And once again, I want to thank you all for listening. And please, if you liked what you heard and you have a moment, please consider rating and reviewing on iTunes. It takes only a second or two, and the link will be in the description wherever you are listening. And please don't forget to subscribe on YouTube because video content should be arriving sometime soon. I'm not sure precisely when, but I will update you in the future. Oh, and if this is your first time here, please subscribe wherever you are listening. Thank you, and I love you all.